Joining us today for this edition of Arirang News, I'm Lee Jae-yoon in Seoul. Chinese President Xi Jinping is bucking tradition and is now poised to make history by staying in office for potentially decades to come. China's official state news agency Xinhua reported that top Chinese Communist Party officials have proposed to drop the presidential limit of 2 consecutive terms from the country's constitution. This has been met with criticism both inside and outside China, but the Congress is all but certain to pass the constitutional amendment when it meets for its annual session on Monday. And before I sit down with an expert to talk more about this, let's first get a check on what's making the news at this hour with our Devin Whiting at the News Center. Devin.
Hi, Jiyoon. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has told his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump of his government's plan to send an envoy to North Korea. Seoul's top office says the two leaders also agreed to keep making efforts for the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula by maintaining the momentum of inter-Korean dialogue. Our chief Blue House correspondent Moon Gan-young reports.
South Korea will send a special envoy to North Korea to follow up on a visit by the sister of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to the South last month. That's what South Korean President Moon Jae-in told his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump during a late-night phone conversation Thursday, the first direct contact between the two leaders since the rare high-level visits by North Korea across the border in recent weeks. The presidential office suggested the decision was part of an effort to continue diplomatic momentum after a series of exchanges between the two Koreas around the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, South Korea, which wrapped up on Sunday. Seoul's presidential Blue House made the announcement after Thursday's 30-minute phone call during which Presidents Moon and Trump discussed the latest engagement between the two Koreas after more than a year of sharply rising tensions over Pyongyang's nuclear missile program. The South Korean president's chief communications secretary said the two allies agreed to maintain and push forward the momentum of inter-Korean talks and continue to make efforts towards denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. In sending a special envoy to Pyongyang, the South Korean leader told the U.S. president that he'll be seeking to reciprocate for the senior delegations dispatched to the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, including his own sister Kim Yo-jong, the first visit by a member of the North ruling bloodline since the Korean War in the early 1950s. Mr. Moon, who advocates dialogue with the North to diffuse tensions, urged both Washington and Pyongyang to give ground to allow for talks. Senior officials from Pyongyang visiting South Korea for the Olympics responded by saying the North was very willing to hold talks with the U.S., while the White House ruled out any possibility of talks before North Korea takes steps towards denuclearization. Although the Blue House added that the leaders of South Korea and the U.S. agreed to continue close consultation on the progress of future dialogue between the two Koreas, it did not identify who the special envoy would be or when the trip would take place. Moon Gan-young, Arirang News, the Blue House.
North Korea is now under the heaviest international sanctions it's ever faced over its missile and nuclear programs. And thanks in part to stronger enforcement of the sanctions by China, the Wall Street Journal says Pyongyang is starting to feel the sting. Lee Seung-jae has this report.
China, a nation which has long been criticized by the U.S. for supporting North Korea, appears to be ramping up enforcement of international sanctions, which the U.S. hopes will force the communist state to abandon its nuclear ambitions. According to a report by the Wall Street Journal, recent sanctions are slamming local Chinese businesses along the border and are starting to impact North Korea with factory closures, price rises, and power shortages in some areas. According to researchers and foreign officials monitoring the North, the impact is likely to intensify this year as the regime runs short of foreign currency and could trigger an economic crisis by 2019. Despite illegal smuggling persisting across the river that forms the border with China, and on a larger scale at sea, China's imports from North Korea dropped by a third in 2017, and in December were down 82% from a year earlier. In addition, Chinese exports to North Korea declined year-on-year every month since July, with oil product exports falling to almost zero since October. And while this may mean losses for China, especially in border regions, China's foreign ministry says Beijing would continue enforcing UN sanctions. On Thursday, North Korea slammed the U.S. for trying to stifle them through sanctions and stated that President Trump's recent warning of a Phase 2 against Pyongyang would not work. An English-language statement by the North's foreign ministry added that they've prepared their own formula to counter it. Last week, President Trump warned there would be a second stage of action if the latest U.S. sanctions fail to work. The new punitive measures target 27 shipping and trade companies, 28 vessels, and one individual suspected of helping North Korea evade existing sanctions. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, President Trump says he'll sign off on steep tariffs on steel and aluminum imports next week. Tariffs that'll hit producers like South Korea and China. The news dealt a blow to stock markets in the U.S. and Asia, but there's reason to hope in Korea that the tariffs won't be as high as feared. Park Jong-hong reports.
President Trump has made it clear that steel and aluminum exports to the U.S. will be subject to tariffs of 25% and 10% respectively. Trump is slated to sign an executive order next week, making it official. The plan was unveiled after a White House meeting with industry executives on Thursday. President Trump added the move is aimed at propping up the U.S. industry and creating jobs for American workers.
It'll be 25% for steel. It'll be 10% for aluminum. And it'll be for a long period of time. We'll be signing it in, and you will have protection for the first time in a long while, and you're going to regrow your industries.
He also said U.S. companies had been, quote, decimated and had been treated unfairly by other countries for decades. Analysts say it's unclear whether the rates of 25% for steel and 10% for aluminum will be instituted across the board or have some exceptions. Trade sources in Washington think the rates would not apply to Canada, which hires a number of American workers. In any case, if the rate turns out to be final, South Korea will be letting out a sigh of relief, as the U.S. Commerce Department had initially suggested dropping a tariff bomb of more than 53% on 12 countries, including Korea. Following Canada and Brazil, South Korea is the third largest exporter of steel to the U.S., with last year's export volume estimated at 3.65 million tons. Critics say Trump's measures will fail to boost jobs and even risk stoking a trade war with China. Beijing has already threatened to curb U.S. imports of soybeans, and the European Union says it will consider taking action as well. Park Jong-hong, Arirang News.
Industrial output by South Korean companies saw a recovery in the month of January compared both to the month and year before. Production was up, especially in two traditional drivers of growth, the auto and semiconductor industries. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
Industrial output of overall industries in Korea increased 4.5% in January compared to the same period last year. Statistics Korea says output jumped 1.2% from the previous month, the steepest rate of increase in 10 months. It attributes the spike to increased production in the auto sector, which grew more than 12% on month thanks to releases of new models and a base effect stemming from sluggish auto exports to the U.S. and the Middle East. A rebound in the auto and semiconductor sectors helped boost output in the mining and manufacturing sectors, which grew 1% from the previous month in January, the first on-month increase in 3 months. Retail sales also spiked 1.7% from the previous month on increased output of automobiles and durable goods. A rebound in the auto sector also helped to boost facility investment, which rose by more than 6% from the previous month, the fastest rate of increase in 10 months. Production in the services sector also jumped 0.8% compared to the previous month, mainly due to increased output in science and technology. However, output in the food and lodging sectors dropped 1.3% from the previous month, declining for the fourth straight month in January. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
China's ruling Communist Party is trying to pave the way for President Xi Jinping to lead the country into the indefinite future, to give him the time and space needed to turn his deeply nationalistic vision for China into a reality. Our Nuaram has more.
The Communist Party on Sunday proposed removing a constitutional clause that limits presidential services to just 2 5-year terms. That would lay the groundwork for President Xi to continue his rule beyond 2023. The proposal, which also covers the vice president position, will likely be approved by China's rubber-stamped parliament at an annual meeting beginning next Monday, where Xi is set to be appointed to his second term. It will mark the country's biggest political change in decades, but it has been widely expected. Ever since taking the helm in 2013, the Chinese leader has been making moves to cement his grip on power. During the party congress last year, Xi secured his status as China's most powerful leader since the late Mao Zedong, the founder of the People's Republic. That meeting ended without the appointment of a clear successor, pointing to Xi's longer-term ambitions. Also, since taking office 5 years ago, Xi has overseen a radical shake-up of the Communist Party as part of its crackdown on deep-rooted corruption. That led to some top leaders once thought untouchable to be removed. Though the majority of the Chinese people welcome Xi's possible extended leadership, there are some who worry of a reappearance of the cult of personality that had surrounded Mao Zedong. With an extended reign of power in sight, Xi will be able to press on with his ambitious political visions, including his One Belt, One Road initiative aimed at building new global trade routes. Noadam, Arirang News.
And to tell us more about all this, Professor Ju Jae-woo from Kyunghee University joins us in the studio today. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so currently China's constitution says the president and vice president, quote, shall serve no more than 2 consecutive terms.
Yes. It is clearly stated in the Constitution, Section 2, Article 79, whereby the term of president is limited to 2 terms, 2 consecutive terms. But instead, I think at this annual Congress, I think they're trying to amend that clause.
All right. Well, I mean, let's go into why China is trying to remove this constitutional presidential term limit.
Yes, there are a lot of speculations to reasoning the amendment attempt. I think one outstanding reason most experts agree is that there's mounting, social and economic reforms that Xi's government has to handle for years to come. And that is obviously the case, and I guess China probably needs probably longer, like you said, more space, time, and longer period of stability, domestically speaking. But also at the same time, I don't think the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, has an appropriate electoral system in choosing its next leader. And over the course, they relied on the old system whereby they pick out the next successor and have him trained in the local areas and rural areas before he comes up to central stage for 5 years of training. But with the rise of China, the international profile of China, I don't think 5 years of lessons or studies of leadership can really make him eligible to be the next leader. So I think for long term, probably Xi might have in mind is to really reform the electoral system.
So, like we heard in the report, do you think this actually means that Chinese President Xi Jinping will be ruling the country almost indefinitely?
Indefinitely, for sure, until like I said, if he's thinking of electoral reform, then he has to come up with a brand new institution. But before that, he'll definitely stay in power.
All right. Well, I mean, last year's Communist Party Congress, Xi cemented his status as the most powerful Chinese leader since Mao Zedong in 1970s. So adding to the party constitution his name and also a political theory attributed to him. Tell us more about this.
Yes, we would say so because it wasn't done in a precedent way. Obviously, when a leader steps down, then his successor, in due respect and in gracious appreciation of his endeavors, so they would insert his name to the Constitution and his idea and ideology.
Right.
Yes, but Xi Jinping, he did it himself during his tenure. So
Which is quite unusual, right?
That's right. Even Deng Xiaoping didn't do that. Deng Xiaoping's name was inserted into the Constitution after he stepped down from the central political stage in 1989. So Xi is simply doing it in such an unprecedented way since Mao Zedong.
All right. Well, and now the Congress is almost certain to pass this constitutional amendment when it meets on Monday. And this is when it also grants Xi Jinping its second five-year term, as well as appoint some new ministers and government officials.
Yes. So definitely, for sure, top 25 Communist Party officials will be changed, and a lot of ministers will be changed. But up to this point, we don't know if the foreign minister will be replaced. And there's some critical positions that will probably likely remain intact. And just like I mentioned, foreign minister was probably likely to stay, but the person who will be in grandiose charge of foreign affairs will be newly appointed. That will be Wang Qishan.
Okay.
Yes. And for economic matter, Li Keqiang will still remain in power, but his advisors would also likely to remain in power too.
All right. Now, what's important is that we're hearing that there's obviously mixed reaction to all this. I mean, there's obviously people who are accepting this, but also a lot of criticisms and opposition to this possibly Xi Jinping's indefinite power or grab on powers. Tell us more about this.
That's right, because I think it's related to the side effects of nepotism. Forget about authoritarianism or totalitarianism, but nepotism will come into play, and I think people are really worried about that. And also, speaking from the outside perspective, then I think it's going to give a rise to domestic criticism of the United States Congress as well as the constituencies, because we got a authoritarian leader in China, and he's going to stay in power for an indefinite period, and he's not going to be willing to deal with human rights and other freedom-related issues. And I think that could backfire to American society, and American society might be really critical of the U.S. government in dealing with with China, especially in terms of economy.
And this could also have a pretty big impact on China's economy in the long run and also short run.
Yes, that's right. Although Xi Jinping would like to further carry out economic reforms in domestically speaking, but I don't know how he's going to deal with the foreign trade and foreign economic issues here, because he'll have ultimate power, so he'll like to go by his own will and at his own discretion. So that's a concern to a lot of outside experts. So here, we are not too sure how he's going to play out his despotism in terms of dealing with foreign trade and economic issues here. And I think that's going to probably infringe probably a great deal of challenge for Chinese domestic economy.
Now, you mentioned a little bit about the U.S., but obviously there has been some growing trade tensions between China and the U.S. So obviously this upcoming constitutional change in China is going to have an impact on the U.S. as well.
Yes, definitely. It could be a two-sided of a coin story here. Xi Jinping will be there for a long term. So, from the U.S. government and leadership perspective, it could be easier. They would have a stable period of dealing with China because they would have to deal with one man. But at the same time, like I said, the side effects of despotism would be a great challenge for the United States too. How President Trump is going to deal with President Xi, who's likely to be an authoritarian leader here, and how is that going to affect U.S. public and U.S. Congress? Probably U.S. Congress and public will be more critical of Xi Jinping's leadership, and probably put more pressure on the United States government in dealing with foreign trade and economic issues with China.
How has Trump been doing with Xi Jinping?
I think that's an interesting question here. Xi Jinping, over the years, China has been taking the initiatives in dealing with the United States on various issues, from social to economic and military and defense and security.
Right.
But here, Donald Trump, when he came out as a presidential candidate, his slogan was America First, right? And I think that American First is also being applied to U.S.-China relations now, because over the past 40 years or so, it was the United States who was led by China and losing the grounds for initiatives on any kind of talks. So I think here, Trump probably wants to, regain the initiative power in dealing with China.
All right. Well, meanwhile, experts say that Xi's concentration of power represents a growing threat to Taiwan's efforts to maintain its de facto independence, as well as the embattled democracy movement over in the semi-autonomous Hong Kong.
Yes, that's right. Previously, prior to the upcoming Congress, there were two offices in dealing with these three territories. One is the Office of Macau and Hong Kong, and the other was the Office of Taiwan Affairs. But I think Xi Jinping wants to merge them together because probably he sees with his concentrated power, he can have more power to supervise and regulate the rules and the rules for the game of dealing with Taiwan and Hong Kong on the same level. I think that is very necessary because they cannot go in a separate way and dealt in a separate way because basically Chinese unification policy is built on one nation, two systems. Right. So and probably he sees them inseparable. So he would like to merge them together and put both three territories all under his wing.
Now, eyes are also on where politics in China will be heading as Xi Jinping is likely to make China more aggressive on the global stage. So what impact will this have on China as well as other countries around the world?
Yes, on the surface it might look like that way because when we think about the authoritarian leader, then we picture how aggressive they can be, how assertive they can be. But here, I think just like I mentioned, if Wang Qishan comes in as a vice president to deal with upcoming foreign affairs, and he used to deal with the United States on the economic front for 4 years or so, and I think he did a tremendous job there. So I think the reshuffling of personnel at the ministerial level or the national level, I think that shows that Xi Jinping does not like to go confrontational with the United States or other players in the world, but instead he would like to make more compromises for domestic reasons. That is to further complete the social and economic reforms. So here I think by putting Wang Qishan up front on the diplomatic front, I think he's seeking for more compromises than probably past 5 years.
So then how would all these potential changes within China affect Korea's economy as well as its national security?
That's another story of a two-sided coin. Like I said, Xi Jinping is fixed to be in power for the next probably decades to come. So here it could be advantageous to South Korea because we know who to deal with. Right? But on the other hand, if we cannot really accommodate or get along with Xi Jinping and his leadership, then we could be in trouble for the long term. So that's why I say it's a two-sided coin. But I guess for our economic side, I think we have to follow really close to what Xi Jinping wants to do with economic reform measures because that's what he definitely has in mind. And I think if nepotism comes into play, then I think it's going to negatively affect us. But if he would like to compromise with the world standard and avoid trade war with the United States and others, then it could work to our advantage. On the security front, Xi Jinping, I think he's going to try to make more compromise with the United States. So if we can, follow the first step of the results of the compromise between the two countries, then I think that could be advantageous to us too.
And also with North Korea.
Yes, that's right. Well. Yeah, that's right. So North Korea, on the North Korean matter, definitely Xi Jinping would like to go along with the United States so that he can achieve two goals. One is to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. Also at the same time, to avoid any military conflicts on the Korean Peninsula. So he would like to, at utmost, really make compromise with the United States and go along and putting more pressure on North Korea. But we have to remember, Xi Jinping, deep down inside, he is very pro-North Korea. Yeah, because of his personal background. His father was a great friend of Kim Il-sung, which is grandfather of Kim Jong-un. And before he came into power, he traveled to North Korea a few times, and we read his speeches and addresses, and he's very pro-North Korea.
All right, a lot to keep our eyes on. Thank you so much for your insight today. And that wraps it up for today and this week, but we'll be back next week with more of the day's top stories and an in-depth look at ongoing issues here in Korea and around the world. So don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching and see you soon.